We'll go ahead and get started. Now, we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 14 and then also Hebrews chapter 7. So go ahead and mark your Bibles at those two places. Hebrews chapter 7 and Genesis 14. If we can get to Hebrews tonight, because we're going to start in verse 18 of Genesis chapter 14. So if we don't get that far tonight, we'll come back to it next week. And the last time we looked, Abraham has separated himself from Lot. And then you have the covenant or the promise from God directly to Abraham to pass on along to the children of Israel. And it says, I will give unto you, verse 15 of chapter 13, for all the land which thou seest, to thee I will give it, and to thy seed forever. Arise, verse 17, walk through the land. And he says that Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is going to be this general area right in here, and this kind of this general area right in here is where he's going to be staying at, and he is going to dwell there. Marim means actually fatness, and so strength and fatness is what that means. So Abraham now is in this general location. At the bottom of the Dead Sea, the Salt Sea, you're going to have some, it's going to be mentioning some kings and then some cities. We're going to look at those, and then we're going to be looking at some other cities and some other kings. Now, back during this time of Abraham, you're not dealing with nations, you're dealing mostly with city-states, just small groups of people or small groups of cities. So you didn't really have any type of nation. In verse 1, we are going to see 4 kings. In verse 2, we're going to see 5 kings. These kings are going to go at war with each other. And I'll give you the list of these. Now, you remember when Sodom and Gomorrah is going to be destroyed. Let me see if I can find that. When Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed, you remember as they are leaving, let me see if I can find it. In verse 30 of chapter 19, it says, and Lot went up out of Zorah and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters were with him, for he feared to dwell in Zorah, and he dwelt in a cave and his 2 daughters. This is actually also going to be mentioned again. Now, in Sodom and Gomorrah, when the fire and brimstone rains down on Sodom and Gomorrah, it's going to be not only Sodom and Gomorrah, but it's going to be 3 other cities that's going to be affected. But we often mention Sodom and Gomorrah, but in actuality, if you look at verse 2 of chapter 14, those are the 5 cities that is going to be destroyed when the fire comes down from Sodom and Gomorrah, because all 5 of these cities are linked together. And they're going to be linked together militarily and politically, and also spiritually with a small s. And the 4 kings that you look at is going to be Elam. He is going to be the place. Now, these are the places. These are not the kings. These are the city-states. You have Elam, you have Shinar, you have Eleazar, and you have Goram. Those are the 4 cities, or the 4 towns, or the 4 small countries. Kedorlaomer is the chief of these kings. Okay, you have Amraphel, you have Arak, and you have Tidal. Now, those are going to be your 4 kings and your 4 city-states that you look at first. Now, where are these at? These are going to be located in this general area here. And Mesopotamia is going to be kind of in this general area where they are going to be located. The other city-states, or the other small cities that we're going to be looking at, is going to be, of course, in Jerusalem or Israel. But the 4 that I mentioned are going to be sort of in this area around Babylon, around in these general areas. So they're going to be kind of on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Those are the 4 city-states and the 4 kings that you look at first. All right? Now, Lot now has separated himself from Abraham. And where does Lot wind up living at? Now remember, when you say Sodom and Gomorrah, those are two separate cities. We often think Sodom and Gomorrah is one town. Those are 2 separate cities. So we're going to have Lot, and he is going to dwell in one of those cities. We'll look at that here in just a second. But let's look at the next 5 kings. Now you've got 4, and now you're going to have 5. All right. Lot's going to dwell in Sodom. All right. We often think that he dwells in Sodom, but he's going to dwell in Sodom and Gomorrah. He's going to dwell in Sodom. Sodom and Gomorrah is closely linked. They are actually, although they're 2 separate cities, Bible historians believe that they was closely related, kind of like, I guess, Skirm and Dawson, just butted up right up against each other. Now, then you're going to have other kings. These are the other 5 kings that these, verse 2, made war with. Okay? These 4 kings are going to make war with these 5 kings. And these 5 kings you look at is going to be from the cities of Sodom, which is Bera, that is their king, Gomorrah, which is Bersha. You have Admah, which is Shinab, and then you have Zebulun, which is Shimber, and then you have Bela, which is named after the king Bela. All right, so those are your 5 city-states and your 5 kings. Now, you have the 4 kings are going to be in this general area, and then you have the 5 kings that are going to be where Zorah is on this map here, is going to be below the Dead Sea in this general area. Okay? So you have the 5 kings on this side, and then you have the 4 on this side. This is going to be the general area, kind of almost in the wilderness area of where the 5, Sodom and Gomorrah, which is the prominent of those 2 places. Now, all these, verse 3, are joined together in the vow of Sidon, which is the Salt Sea. What is the Salt Sea also known as? The Dead Sea. The Dead Sea. Good job. So, it is going to be south, so that is why we kind of get a clue of where Sodom and Gomorrah and those other general areas are, because these 5 are not going to travel over here to fight. Those 4 are going to come over here, so it's going to be at the bottom of the Salt or the Dead Sea is where they think where Sodom and Gomorrah is actually located at. All right? So they go into this valley, or they go into this area, and this is the reason for the battle. And you say, well, what does all this have to do with Abraham? Okay, I'll get to that in a second. And it says, 12 years they served Kedorlaomer. These 5 served this one for 12 years, okay? And in the 13th year, they rebelled. So they've been serving them for 12. When it means serving them for 12, they're basically paying them taxes and they're paying them tolls and things like that. So they're going to decide to break away. So in the 13th year, they rebelled. Now, in the 14th year, all right, here comes Kedorlaomer in verse 5, and the kings that were with him, the 3 other kings that I mentioned, are with him, and they smote. And now this is, when it starts talking about these are going to be the areas that they're going to be looking at. They're all going to be fighting in this general area right here, okay? They're going to destroy them. They're going to take all they have, all right? Now, and look in verse 7, and it says, and they came, look at that word Kadesh, all right? The word Kadesh is also Kadesh Barnea, which is going to be lower in this general area, which is also known, Kadesh Barnea in this general area, is where the Israelites wandered for 40 years. So that is down in the wilderness. So basically your battle is going to be being taken basically in this general area right here is where the battle is going to be taken. Now, Abraham is not in this area. He's up here in Miramar, basically around in the Jerusalem, in the Hebron area, in the Bethel area. Okay? Now, here it goes. Verse 8. And there went out the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, and it starts naming all the kings, all right? And they're going to join them in this battle in verse 8. So you have these 5 kings going up against these 4 kings. And they're all going to come to battle in this lower part, right here in the south part of the Dead Sea. All right, now look at verse 10. And the vale or the valley of Sidon was full of slime pits. All right? It's marshy land, swampy land. And it says it was full of slime pits. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountains. So you have 5 kings. 2 of the kings fled and couldn't go anywhere because they got stuck in the slime pits. The other 3 fled to the mountains out in this general area of Zorah. You remember what we read a while ago in Genesis, that they fled up to the mountains, Lot and his 2 daughters? That is the mountain area that these 3 kings are going to go to. Now, they remained there, they fled to the mountains. Now look in verse 11. You remember where Lot is staying at. He is staying in Sodom. He's staying in Gomorrah, in those areas. Here's what the kings, this is what happens when you link up with the world. As long as he is with Abraham, everything was basically pretty good, right? But once he separates himself from Abraham, it says, and they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals, and they went their way. And guess who else they take? Lot. They not only get everything that Sodom and Gomorrah has, which is a very fruitful, very rich country, because it tells us in verse 10 of chapter 13 that when Lot lifts up his eyes, he sees that Sodom and Gomorrah is like a garden of Egypt. It's like the Garden of Eden. And it is a very beautiful place, very rich. So when these kings come down, everything that Sodom and Gomorrah has, they take. And they're also going to take Lot. Okay? And it says, and they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, all of his goods, and they departed. Now, Abraham really, if you think about it, they've already separated, right? Does Abraham really have a dog in the fight? Because Abraham and Lot's already, they're done. They're gone. Basically, Lot, he says, you go your way, I'll go my way. But Lot gets himself into trouble, right? So now, what is going to happen in the next, I'm trying to hurry up so I can get to Melchizedek. What is going to happen is Abraham is going to hear about his Lot brother's son, which is his nephew, being taken captive. All right, so he's going to get about 318 men, and he's going to go after them unto Dan. Now, Dan is going to be way up here near Damascus. So what is happening is after those 5 kings take care of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot, get rid of them, they are making their way all the way back to go to where they came from, which is around Ur. All right? So Abram is going to overtake them in this general area right here between Damascus and Bethel, in this general area here, okay, which is going to be Samaria. So they're making their way back. All right. So and when Abram heard, look in verse 14, that his brother was taken captive, he took 318 men and pursued them all the way up into Dan, which is going to be right near Damascus in this general area here. So pursues them a long way. And he's going to divide himself again, and he divides them, he and his servants, by night, and he smote them and pursued them to Hava, which is on the left hand of Damascus. So if you have Damascus here, where's left at? Here. Do you see how far Abraham is going to pursue these guys? In actuality, he could have said, Lot, you got yourself into that? Tough. You shouldn't have went to Sodom. You should have stayed, you could have went somewhere else. But Abraham, being a godly man, decides, and he is going, I want you to look what he does. All right? Pursues them all the way up into Damascus. And in verse 16 it says, and he brought back all the goods, all of it. He brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods. So not only did Abraham get Lot, his family, and his wealth back, but guess what else Abraham brings back? All the stuff that was brought out of Sodom and Gomorrah. Every bit of it. You ever notice that Abraham has a habit of when he goes in somewhere into something worldly, he brings stuff out of it all the time? Look what he brought out of Egypt. Look what he brought out of Sodom and Gomorrah, all their goods and stuff. And he says, and the women also and the people. So Abraham's a big hero. Him and these 300 and something men. All right? Now, when you start dealing with the next few verses, and I'm trying to hurry, we kind of stayed a little bit long, which is perfectly fine doing prayer requests. That does not bother me at all. But you're going to meet two people. You're going to meet a worldly person, and you're going to meet a heavenly or a kingly or a spiritual person. All right? There's always two, correct? When you study numerology, you always have two. So you're going to have two people here, okay? And you're going to meet a man by the name of Melchizedek, which is, we know absolutely nothing about. We only know about a few verses of right here in Genesis and a few verses in the book of Hebrews. That's it. People have over and over and over tried to figure out who this guy is, but we cannot go no further than what the Bible tells us, correct? All right, now, verse 17. You're going to meet the king of Sodom. Now, what is interesting is that who's ever done a lot of study on typology? Have I ever mentioned typology here? I have, haven't I? Okay. What typology is, the principle of typology basically is it is something that is going to be like an illustration that is going to point, and an illustration in the Old Testament that points to something in the New Testament. That is what type means. It is to point. All right. It's either it could be in pictures, it could be in objects, it could be a person, it could be an event, it could be a thing, it could be a ritual. When I mean ritual, talking about the sacrifices, talking about the tents. I think we studied a little bit about it when we were studying Exodus, the curtains and the rings and the poles and all that. All of that is a type of. All of your typology is going to be typed to one person. Who is that person? Jesus or Christ. Now remember, a typology is a type of. Okay, you have to keep that in mind. And they do really fail in comparison because you really can't compare anything to Christ because He is so great. But what the writers do is they get down on our feeble level so we can see what we're dealing with. Now, when you're dealing with typology that is pointing towards Christ, you have Passover lamb, brazen serpent. You have the two birds that is found in Leviticus. You have the Day of Atonement that's found in Leviticus. You have Joseph, he is a type of Christ. You have David, who is a type of Christ. You've got tons and tons and tons of stuff. If you study the tabernacle in the wilderness, all of that is a type of Christ. The brass, the gold, the silver, everything. The rings, the different colors. Anybody ever done any study on the cities of refuge that's found in Leviticus? You had certain cities of refuge, which are all a type of Christ, and then you had the Levitical cities. If you wanted to do typology and study it yourself, probably 3 or 4 years, you'd probably cover it in about 3 or 4 years maybe. It's just all throughout the Scriptures. Now, one of the biggest types that points to Christ is a man by the name of Melchizedek. All right? Now, he is going to be found actually again in Hebrews. All right? He's going to be found in Hebrews chapter 7. All right? Now, I want to, when you get your finger there, just kind of hold it and then go back to Genesis chapter 14. All right, now back in Genesis chapter 14, I want to read these verses, and then we're going to go back. I'm trying to hurry, I do apologize. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter. All right? And the kings that were with him in the valley of Sheba, which is the king's dale. So you have these kings, the king of Sodom, that is going to come out and meet him. So you have the king of Sodom, which we already know what kind of city Sodom is. It's a wicked city. So more than likely, what kind of king is this? Wicked king, good job. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was a priest of the Most High God. Now, I want to stop right there. First of all, he is going to be a king, and he has 2 titles given to him. What are those 2 titles?
King and priest.
King and priest. Keep that in mind. What was the title of the first individual we met in verse 17. The Sodom guy. What is he? He's a king. Is he a priest? He's just a king, right? So you have worldly, just a king, and then you have spiritual, which is king and priest. Now, once again, Melchizedek is a type of Christ. He's not Christ, he is a type of. Okay? All right. Stop in verse 18 and go to Hebrews chapter 7. My allergies are killing me. I knew when those things started blooming, it would. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, or Salem, which is actually, Hebrews is, for me, is the hardest book of the Bible to find. I don't know why. That's why I got to mark it. Now, if we take off the Jeru of Jerusalem, what do you have? So he is the king of what city?
Jerusalem.
What is the holy city of God? Jerusalem. All right. So you start to make a connection now. All right. Back to Hebrews. All right. He is the king. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. What the book of Hebrews basically is about is the priesthood of Jesus. That's what it's basically about. The character and the priesthood of Jesus. When you study Hebrews, that's what you're basically studying. Verse 2. To whom also Abraham gave a tenth part. So Abraham is going to give him a tenth part of all. First being by interpretation, king of righteousness. We're still talking about Melchizedek. So he is a king and a priest, but he is also a king of righteousness. And after that also a king of Salem, which is king of what? Peace. All right. So we're dealing with the king and a priest. Look in verse 3. Without father, mother, without descent, having neither beginning nor days or end of life, but made like the Son of God, abideth a priest continually. What does continually mean? Always. All right. Now, in order to understand this, you have to go back and find out about the priest. In verse 4 it says, Now consider how great this man was, unto whom even the patriarch Abram gave a tenth of the spoils. Underline that word. And verily they that are of the sons of Levi, what was the priestly tribe? What was the first high priest? Aaron. All right, good. Who received the office of priesthood, having commandment of the tithes of the people according to the law, that is of the brethren, though they came out of the loins of Abraham. All right. I want you to underline, if you don't want to underline your Bible, you don't ever have to do that. But you have Aaron and you have Levi. Okay? Now, Melchizedek, once again, is a type of Christ. I want you to keep that in mind. I'm trying to weave this around. Now, and when you think about the priesthood, and when we think about a priest today, what image do we have? Catholic guy with one of them little, whatever that thing is, going around, blessing people. But back during Jerusalem, a priest was somebody that was very exalted. You remember it was a big deal for Moses when the rod of Aaron, the bud, and also had fruit on it. A priest back during the time of Jerusalem was a big deal. High priest was a big deal. Okay? Now, Melchizedek is described, first of all, as being king and what? Priest. Okay, now, the reason, and you should know this, you had a priest in the Old Testament was for what? Huh? Do what? Sacrifices and offering, but what was those to get to? God. All right, so if you look at the word priest in Latin, this is kind of interesting. It is pontifex. Pontifex. Pontus actually means bridge, and fix means to connect, or produce, or to build. So a priest is a bridge builder to who? God. In the Old Testament, you had to have a priest. The reason you had to have a priest is because man could not get near God. You remember in the book of Exodus, when they come below the mountain, what does God tell them to do? Put up barriers, don't come near me. You know the reason they couldn't come near God? They was unholy and unclean and unfit. But he allows who to go up there? Moses, which was acting as priest. He was an intercessor. So what Moses was doing was building a bridge to God. There's an old song by the Perkins family called Jesus Built a Bridge to Heaven, with 2 boards and 3 rusty nails. So there is a priesthood. That is what the priesthood is. It builds something to God. What good is a bridge? To cross. If you didn't have a buddy of mine years ago, Dad used to do a revival in Belmont, Mississippi. And me and a buddy of mine was going to go to Belmont, Mississippi for that week revival. And he lives in Scottsboro, so we had to leave that night. And we got around, I don't even know where we're at, somewhere in Winston County. And it was dark, and we was going down this road, boys, just to get me. And all of a sudden, we come to this thing that was, I guess somebody knocked the sign down. One of those barriers, bridge out. All right? And no joke, me and Pastor ran off. And the reason we couldn't get to that other side, obviously, why? Wasn't no bridge. The people in the Old Testament, they couldn't get to God unless they had a priest. When I know we've studied this, on the Day of Atonement, this is what is very interesting about the priest. And what is interesting about Jesus Christ being our high priest. Okay? It describes in the book of Hebrews, it describes all through the Old Testament and New Testament that he is a better priest than. All right? Jesus is better than. All right? Now, on the Day of Atonement, which we studied that was the one day that the sins of Israel was wiped clean. All right? And then, but what did they have to do another 365 years later? Days later. Do it again. But do you know who had to cleanse himself from sin before he could build a bridge to God by the people, for the people? The priest. All right? This is what is interesting. Did Jesus Christ have to cleanse himself of any kind of sin to get to God? You know, because he was sinless, right? There was an earthly priest, which is Aaron, and he had sons, and then you have a heavenly priest. The earthly priest had to atone for his sins first. If you go to Leviticus, I'm trying to hurry, guys, I do apologize. Leviticus chapter 16, verse 6. I want you to look at this. In Leviticus chapter 16, verse 6, I'll get to Melchizedek maybe tonight, I doubt it. In Leviticus chapter 16, verse 6, I want you to notice just about the priest. And it says, and Aaron shall offer his bullock, Leviticus 16, 6, and Aaron shall offer his bullock of a sin offering, which is for who? Himself. So the first thing that Aaron had to do was to make sure that he was sinless or sin-free before he could offer up the rest of them. Okay? Now, going back to Genesis, to Hebrews 7. He is a king of righteousness. He is a king of Salem. He is a king of peace. And he is the Most High. And he is also a priest. Okay? Now, you have the first high priest was who? Aaron. And now we're looking at this high priest, this priest, which is Melchizedek. All right? And he being a type of God, or a type of Christ. Okay? What did Jesus Christ eat or tell the disciples was his body and his blood? What did Melchizedek come out serving to Abraham? Bread and wine. Okay? Now, when you're dealing with Aaron and the priesthood, they used the word, they couldn't say the word God, they couldn't use his name, so they used the word Yahweh. Everybody should know this. They would not pronounce it. If you look Yahweh up in the Hebrew, it means, there is a prefix that means closed, or like a boundary. In the Old Testament and also in the New Testament, did the Jews care if they had a bunch of Gentiles come over to their quote-unquote religion? The Hebrews was the only people you know that didn't get out and try to get converts. They were a closed or a secure group. They didn't care if nobody joined them in. They didn't, the least the better. All right? Now, so Aaron was a priest of a nation or a nationality, which is the Hebrews, the Jews, or Israel. Now I want you to look how Melchizedek is described, all right? Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God. If you look at that word Most High, up in the Hebrew, it is Elion. And Elion means everything. So Aaron was a priest just to the Jews, but Melchizedek, being a type of Christ, is a priest to who? Jew and Gentile. All right? So you see how, even though you have an earthly priest, which he done the job, but it was still continual sacrifice. The priests, during this time, when you start studying 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, they were subject to God, and they were also subject to the king. Okay? They were subject to the king. What makes Melchizedek different and what makes Jesus Christ different, being our high priest, he is not only priest, but he is also what? King. So who does Jesus answer to? Nobody, because he has the authority. Who did Melchizedek answer to? He's priest and king. Remember, he is a type of. Okay? Please keep that in mind. Now, to be a priest during the time of the Old Testament and the New Testament, what tribe did you have to come out of?
Levi.
You had to be able to trace your lineage all the way back to Aaron. It didn't matter what kind of riffraff come out of his loins, you could be priest. If you studied the Old Testament, they had some rough priests back during that time. Didn't matter what degree you had, if you came from that tribe, be priest. Now, Melchizedek was chosen not because of his lineage, he was chosen because of his personal traits. All right? Who is our high priest? Jesus. Do you know that Jesus didn't come from a priestly line? What line did Jesus come from? Judah. Judah's not the priestly line. So by Old Testament law says that Jesus cannot be what? Priest. So you start seeing the connection here with Melchizedek. By Old Testament law, Jesus couldn't be priest. He's from the tribe of Levi, not Judah, not Levi. Now, with Melchizedek, I want you to look. It says that he has no mother and no father and no relative, no family tree or anything. Does this mean that he just kind of plopped out of nowhere? No. He had a mom and dad. But in order to be a high priest, once again, you had to be able to trace your lineage back to Levi, back to the tribe of Levi, or back to Aaron. Melchizedek didn't have to do that because he was chosen of God. It didn't matter what his lineage was. God chose him because of his traits, because of the kind of person he was. So it didn't matter the bloodline at all. Like we said, Jesus came from the tribe of Judah. He wasn't from the priestly tribe. So, and what is interesting here is that the last word in verse 3 of Hebrews chapter 7 dealing with Melchizedek is the word continually, which means, and somebody said it, what? Always. All right? Now, Old Testament priest Aaron, they had a timetable. You could only be priest between the ages of 25 and 50. After that, you had to retire. Couldn't do it anymore. So there was a timetable on earthly priests. Jesus Christ being our high priest, what is his timetable? He doesn't have a timetable. He's just always been. All right? Now, and it says that he is a king of peace, which is continually. All right? He is not only peaceful. Aaron was a peaceful individual, but he was not a king of peace. Who is our king of peace? Jesus Christ. So, with the high priest, there was no permanent peace there. Day of Atonement, send that goat off, everybody rejoices. The next day, sin starts piling up again. Jesus Christ being our high priest, we have continual peace forever and forever and forever and forever. So those are your connections with Melchizedek and Christ. Okay, he being a type of Christ. All right. The reason I wanted you to underline the word spoils is this. Now consider how great this man was, unto whom even the patriarch Abraham gave a tenth of the spoils. All right. The word spoils in the Greek actually means top of. All right.
Means what?
Top of, or it means heap. To heap up. It means, you remember when you was they always called stuff, they kept stuff on the top shelf in old country stores. That's where the good stuff was, wasn't it? You know, that's very expensive, so let me get it off the top shelf. All right? Now, when you look at that word spoils, it means heap or top of. It means that Abraham gave Melchizedek the very best he had. I'm fixing to quit. When he brings all those spoils back, he gives Melchizedek the tenth of it. Now, a lot of people are going, that's why we give a tenth of everything to Jesus. Does it say that? It doesn't say that. Do you know what the difference between tithing and offering is? Tithing is what basically Melchizedek received from Abraham, a tenth of. You know what an offering is? It's above that. Now, you say, well, we should give 10%, should give 10%. We should never limit ourselves to what we give God. Ever. So now, he says he has no mother, no father. In actuality, did Jesus have a mother or father, quote unquote? He had an earthly mother and dad. But you say God was his father. Yeah, he's his father, but there's also one. So you see how complicated that gets. But yes, Melchizedek and Jesus Christ type of. They are a picture of. Now, I'm sorry guys. I knew that would take a long time. Back to verse 4, chapter 14. I'm going to run through these and we'll get done. He's going to bring forth bread and wine. He is the priest of the Most High God. Melchizedek is going to bless him. And he said, blessed be Abraham of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. Verse 20. And he blessed the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand, and he gave him tithes of all. Now we have Melchizedek, which is a type of Christ. But now guess who moves in? The world. Here comes the king of Sodom. This is what he's going to say to Abraham. Look, the king of Sodom said unto Abram, give me the persons, and take thee the goods of thyself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from thread or even shoelace or shoe latch, and that I will not take anything that is what? Yours. You can have everything. I don't want your stuff. Do you know what Abraham received? He received blessings from Melchizedek, which is a type of Christ, and he refused what the king of Sodom was going to give him. As Christians, do you know what the world will give us? Grief, sorrow, disappointment, things that will fade away. From Christ, you can go back to Hebrews. We get righteousness, we get peace, we get a high priest, we get a great king, we get it all. So that is just a picture of a small, very small window of what typology is. Melchizedek is a type of Christ. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you and we thank you. Thank you, dear God, for this study. Thank you for this book that you've given us. Help us, dear God, to always, always remember that you are our high priest. Dear God, for the numerous prayer requests we've heard, we lift them up to you. Dear God, help us to be not only a studying church, but help us to be like the Church of Pentecost, which is a praying church. Thank you, dear God, for everything you've given us. In your name we pray.